Hi there, everyone. It is 1 o'clock. It is Wednesday. Welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. We are so honored to have you with us here on the show today. Go ahead and jump onto the chat, say hello. Let us know where you're watching from today, what's happening in your school district. Ellen Wheeler, our very first viewer, to go ahead and jump onto the chat. So again, so honored to have you with us on the show. You can see that I am solo today. Edgar Zazueta, our Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations, on some very well-earned vacation today. Somehow I assume that he is watching the show, much like I did a couple of weeks ago when he and Wes were doing the show. So we're going to try and make him proud as we get going today. Part of the reason that we came on today is we've spent so much time talking about vaccines and masking. We've had a lot of news over the last few days, and so we wanted to widen that discussion. And we have Mackenzie Mays on the show today. She is the lead education reporter over at Politico, California. She's got some late information that's just coming in right now. Also, we're going to break down some of that news that has taken place. But again, go ahead and jump onto the chat. I can see Michelle, Katie McNamara is on there, Amy, Brianna. So good to have you. Our longtime viewer, Gary Reller, who told me, I saw it in the chat at least half an hour ago, that he was already set up for the show. He was already with lunch in front of him. So again, always happy to have you guys. I do want to make note of something because again, we've been talking about masks and vaccines a lot over the last couple of weeks. We wanted to shift some of the story today. However, we do have members of our governmental relations team in our broadcast studio right now. Saret Kaminsky is there. I believe Laura Preston is here. Two of our guests that come on here quite often. They are behind the scenes. If you have some questions related to vaccines, related to masks, Laura and Saret are behind the scenes to answer any questions that you may have as far as they have answers to them. So if you have anything, go ahead and throw those into the chat as well. Also want to tell you about a CDE webinar that is happening tomorrow. This one concerning Assembly Bill 130, which is all about changes to independent study. We're going to go ahead and flash a link up on our page here that will direct you to that webinar that is being put on by CDE. You can also go onto our Facebook page where we have a link where you can go ahead and get to that. Let's go ahead and update some news headlines, which will lead us right into our guests today. Vivian, Amy, so good to see you guys. Marie and Lori. Let's talk about the positivity rate right now here in this country, and then we'll hit what's happening here in the state. ABC News reporting earlier today that the U.S. Reports the highest number of new COVID cases in the world. According to the World Health Organization, the U.S. saw a 131% increase in new cases for the week ending July 25th. A startling number, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Also, you guys know the story from the governor on Monday, putting out the guidance on state and healthcare workers here needing to have vaccinations or they will be tested. And then yesterday, we got this information from the CDC, some new guidance there that everyone, including those fully vaccinated, should wear masks indoors in areas with high transmission of COVID-19. Everyone in K-12 schools should be wearing a mask. All vaccinated people in the U.S. should wear a mask if someone in their household is unable to be protected by a vaccine. We've talked often about the positivity rates, but also the vaccination rates in many states. So that is something that is kind of leading the story here. Let's see. We are at the moment trying to bring in our guest. I'm looking at my chat here with my production team in the back as we're working on that. Folks, if you have any additional information on what districts are going to do, what your districts are going to do as far as the vaccination situation, the testing situation, if you're going to have any testing sites over on your school campuses or in your district buildings, go ahead and let us know on the chat, because we are interested to find out what some of the districts are doing. Again, I'm looking through my I'm looking through the chat here with my production team. Just give us a moment as we're trying to work out some technical difficulties. As you know, if you were watching last week, we dealt with an incredible number of technology issues, and we are blaming the company for which we have our broadcast platform. And if any technical issues happen today, we're going to blame Edgar, because it's all Edgar's fault. Let's go ahead and bring in our guest today, because we do have our technology figured out. Mackenzie Mays is the lead education reporter from Politico, California. She's been a guest of ours a couple of times on the show. Mackenzie, it's so good to have you. As I said, all tech issues are Edgar's fault today. So we'll just go with that. I understand, Mackenzie, because you've been working behind the scenes as we've been getting ready to come on the air. There is a little bit of breaking news that you have to report related. Am I correct, from CDPH?
Yeah, just within the hour. So there will be a sort of statewide mask mandate in California. It's slightly different than before because it's only for areas of indoor high transmission, but right now that looks like 90% of the state. So there had been a lot of questions this week and last week, will the governor reinstate that mask mandate? And so today we found out that the answer is yes.
Let me ask you, as far as schools are concerned, what is the potential impact on schools based on what we heard from the governor Monday, what we heard from the CDC yesterday, and now this information that's coming in from CDPH? What is the potential impact on schools? Did we lose Mackenzie? It looks like we did lose Mackenzie. All right, well, let's go ahead and yeah, we certainly did lose her. My apologies, folks. As always, when we have something that's happened here, technology-wise on the show, we want to go ahead and make sure that we tell you that we're experiencing that, and we'll work through. I am going to ask Lauren Surratt, because Denise Patton has thrown a question in there, and Lauren Surratt, who are in our broadcast studio, if you want to toss up an answer, because I assume if there are questions coming in, others would be interested in the answer. Denise Patton asked, what's happened with the CDE testing program? I signed up as a participant for our district. However, I haven't heard anything back yet. If there is an answer, Laura or Surratt, that you can go ahead and pass along to Denise or any of our viewers, we would be very happy for you to do so. Also want to remind you about that webinar that is taking place tomorrow, 3:00 from CDE. They're going to be talking about Assembly Bill 130 and the changes to independent study. There is a link that we have put up in our chat. We've also put that up on our broadcast page here. And if you are on our ACSA Facebook page, you can go ahead and go right to the post. It has that link there. So go ahead and click that. Angie Brown from Klamath Trinity, they have had COVID PCR and rapid antigen testing on site at their wellness center, available to staff and students during the 2020-2021 school year. So that a little bit of information from Angie Brown on what is happening. I'm assuming that is something that we have heard or will be hearing in other places. This is from Surratt and Laura. To Denise. Denise Patton asked that question, what happens with CDE testing program? The response from our team behind the scenes, there are office hours weekly for LEAs, Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and Thursdays. I've just lost that comment on my chat. Okay. Do we have Mackenzie back? If we have Mackenzie back, let me know. We do have Mackenzie back, and it appears that she is on a mobile device that is not her computer. Am I correct with that, Mackenzie? Are we going to give the people over at Apple something to say, hey, the computer doesn't work, but the phone works?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes,
Okay, great.
fantastic. All right. So we were talking about that breaking news that you had. Let me ask you about the school impact on that information that came from CDPH. Do you see some type of an impact on schools? Maybe we hear it today. Maybe we hear it by the end of the week. What are you thinking after hearing this?
Well, I wouldn't say so because I think we're already there on schools, right? As we talked about, CDC sort of followed in the footsteps of California. If people were following along earlier this month when Newsom and CDPH announced that all students and staff would wear masks regardless of vaccination status, some people thought that was an overreach because it went a little bit further than CDC. And then this week, CDC said, you know what, we're going to do the same thing. And so I don't think a statewide mask mandate really does anything but sort of bolster that school's decision.
We've got two parent advocacy groups out there, the Let Them Breathe group and Reopen California Schools, that have sued Governor Newsom, top health officers last week over that statewide mandate that children wear masks to school regardless of their vaccination status. That information that came out from CDC yesterday, does that kind of squelch some of the debate over this? And do you think parent groups are going to continue to advocate for masks off in some of the local areas?
I do think that these parents are going to continue to advocate for that. Long before the lawsuit and long before this mask mandate in schools, there were groups of parents who were really frustrated and thought that the state of California could have done a lot more to get kids back in person. As you all know, we were, one of the states with the least amount of in-person instruction for a long time during the worst of the pandemic. And so, obviously CDC gives us like federal protection as far as a lawsuit goes. But I don't think that these parent organizations, that doesn't solve much of their concerns. And if you go through the lawsuit, there's more than just the mask. That's definitely a focus, but they're upset with the quarantine rules, regular testing rules. So there's other stuff to be considered, I think.
Folks, again, thank you for your patience today as we've been working through our tech issues, and we're blaming Edgar for those. If you have any questions for Mackenzie, go ahead and drop those into our chat. I want to ask you about the governor's announcement on Monday, Mackenzie, about the proof of vaccinations for health and state workers or face the two weekly testing. The governor indicated that local mayors have reached out to him about following suit in their cities. I'm assuming that you're hearing other types of pieces of this type of information from other places here in the state, whether it's counties or cities. What's been the reaction from public educators about any type of trickle-down effect if it happens in a county or in a city?
Yeah, there's definitely, I think right now we're talking like in the very thick of it. I talked to a lot of teachers, a lot of union reps, a lot of school officials, and it's sort of a collective shrug right now. I think everyone's watching and waiting to hear what the next guidance is. I think there is some frustration in that, or some concerns too from parents who, when they see these new rules, wonder how it can affect schools. As we know, unions fought for vaccine access when access was hard to get. And I've heard from a lot of districts that they're around like 75% of teachers are willingly vaccinated. But when it comes to having to prove vaccines, there are questions about whether or not that's something that would need to be bargained or negotiated officially with unions. And then that would obviously worry people about if that would affect the timeline for schools to get started, which for a lot of schools is next month. So I think right now everyone's just like watching very closely, me included, to see if this is something you would require, or would you just continue with the line of encouraging it without mandating it?
You mentioned frustration, and I wanted to ask you about what the level of frustration is among educators you speak to, because we had CDC, not this week, but we had CDC put something out, and it took CDPH a good amount of time to respond. We've had questions about youth athletics, and we still don't have anything related to that. school has started in parts of this state. What is the level of frustration you're hearing in your conversations from educators about why we are hearing and experiencing such delays in this information coming down, especially when it directly impacts students and staff?
Yeah. I think one reason for the frustration from teachers is, they've been blamed in some circles for things that were out of their control. And I think they're feeling that. So some teachers are saying, hey, I'm waiting for this guidance. And at the same time, I'm being blamed for this guidance that I did not really have a say in. So I think it's been really difficult for everybody involved. It's been a global pandemic for way too long. And it's just felt out of control, I think, even from the officials that we thought should be able to have some control over these policies. So, I think everybody's just holding their breath right now. Today, even with the mask mandate news, is this going to have some sort of trickle down effect, like you said, where schools will have to scramble and change everything when it feels like we're so close but so far away to getting back to normal in schools?
Well, and Trinae Nelson just puts in, we begin school next week, and we'll have to apply the guidelines as they've been provided. Let me ask you about, again, your conversations with educators, because the conversations that I've had, and not necessarily ACSA members, but educators at all levels, are seeing this increase in the Delta variant, the increase in the positivity cases, and some of them are very concerned that we are quickly going to be back into distance learning, perhaps even before the holidays, that we end up back in distance learning. What are you hearing in school communities related to that? Is there a concern that you're hearing about, hey, you know what, if this thing continues to explode in the way it is, that we may be back in distance learning?
I'm definitely hearing it in a way I wasn't hearing it 2 weeks ago. I talked to a union rep today, and they told me, I can't answer these questions right now. Can you get back to me in 3 weeks? Because we've learned from the pandemic that so much can change in a week, let alone a month. And so I think we're all sort of remembering that and seeing that the science changes so rapidly that people are really starting to take the Delta variant seriously and wondering if, yes, this is going to happen. And that's a problem, I think, because if you look around at districts and where they stand with their unions, a lot of them have not sealed the deal on exactly how these virtual academies and distance learning will go. And so if we're back in a position where it's going to be more widely offered than we thought, then we really need to get those details figured out. If you watch the state budget, there were conversations that were really hard to strike a compromise on regarding virtual learning, distance learning. And so it feels like we just overcame that hurdle. And now we don't know if it's going to be even, affect even more students than we thought in the fall.
Let me ask Richard's question here. Richard just tossed a question in from YouTube. Any known timeline on CDPH releasing guidance pertaining to athletics, band, choir, other school activities? This is a question we are hearing. Any idea on when CDPH might have something that comes out related to youth sports?
That's a great question. No. When CDPH came out with the school mask rules, that was a line we saw that said, hey, this other part is to come. And now I sort of wonder if, because things have changed since then, even on the general rules, if that means those rules will be pushed further off. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of guidance say outdoors is safe. Right now, you don't have to wear a mask outdoors in schools, but you do indoors. So you would think that would, lend itself to the sports rules and some other activities, but that's not usually how these rules go. I think the state officials have been working with the CDC and probably other states too to figure out what the best thing to do is, but yeah, I don't have a good premonition on that one.
Let me ask you about the recall election. We'll shift that way just for a moment. Recall election. No matter what happens, what is the impact on schools? Do you see an impact on the California public school system, no matter what happens in the recall election?
Yeah, I kind of feel like we should flip that question and say, how will what's happening in schools and what has happened in schools in the pandemic affect the recall more so? The general sense of what I get is that people will pay attention to education policy more. I know that we all do, but I'm not sure that it got the level that it needed to, the level of attention that it needed to in the past. And then this pandemic happened, and we really thrust education policy into the conversation. So, it doesn't matter if you're not a parent with a child in the system. It impacts the economy. It is, surrounded by social justice issues and inequities and all these things. So I would just say that I think no matter who the governor is, they will have to care about schools in a way that maybe they didn't in the past.
I read your story on the 21st. Folks, I do read Mackenzie's stuff. I don't just bring her on because I like to talk with her. I do like to talk with her. But I read your story on the 21st about the gubernatorial recall candidate, Kevin Kiley, and the legislation he wants to put forth in 2022 about school vouchers. I've seen talking points out there from a number of recall candidates about public education, which is why I just asked you about the recall. For the audience, what is out there about school vouchers? And do you get a sense that this is a talking point just related to public education, or is there some reality to this? Did we lose Mackenzie again? No, there we go. All right.
It's definitely a Republican talking point and has been for a long time. What I would say where it gets sort of a boost, because as we know, California is very blue, so a Republican talking point might not go a long way here. But where I do think it might have a little more light is what we saw in the pandemic when families were scrambling for choice in one way or another, where they were going to charter schools that already had their plans down for online learning in a way that traditional schools did not. Kiley and other Republican candidates who have used the recall to push voucher-like programs, saving account programs, that seems like a long shot to me in California. But there is some polling about how voters themselves feel about vouchers, specifically for low-income kids. That says that they're pretty okay with it. Now, getting it through the legislature, I think it's a different question. We have this recent history of cracking down on charter schools. So I feel like it would be a stretch to sort of reverse all of that and embrace this. But it's definitely, one of the first recall ads that we saw on TV actually was about schools and was about vouchers, which doesn't feel like it has anything to do with the recall. But if you listen, it's definitely playing some sort of role.
Certainly a talking point. Let me ask you, I talk with so many people about what the experience has been like in public education since last March, when school districts began to shut down. And you have a different lens on this because you spent the time reporting on public education during this pandemic. What have you learned as a reporter covering public education over this last year and a half? What have you learned that you didn't know before or you hadn't experienced before?
Well, I think
Bring out your list of things, Mackenzie.
I've definitely learned a lot. I learned a lot about special education. And that's kind of what I would say is, which I've sort of already said today, but it just shed a light on all of these inequities and this tale of two Californias in a way that I had always paid attention to, but this, I didn't realize how bad it was. So whether that was broadband access, special education services, just how much that social emotional role that schools played, I think we sort of all took for granted and didn't really fully realize, even if you're in it like me, how, sort of tragic and drastic just this mass closure of schools would be. So I think me and everybody else is going to go forward looking at education policy and the role of teachers and the role of community schools completely different now, because we've lived through what it means to not have schools, I think.
I know that our viewers, because I've been paying attention to it, Mackenzie, over your left shoulder is what appears to be a Rubik's Cube and not one that is complete. Whose is that, and how long has it taken to get to that point?
It is certainly not mine.
Okay.
I have never even attempted. It is my husband's. All these books are mine, if you guys are interested in that, but the Rubik's Cube, not so much.
Ben Rubik's Cube, not too much. Okay, that is good to know. We'll give him a hard time for that. Mackenzie Mays, lead education reporter, Politico, California. Mackenzie, it's so good to see you again. We'll have you back on ASAP when you have the opportunity to break any news that you want to on this show. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, folks. I've got stuff that's coming in over here. Just saw something. Oh, all right. It's for something completely different. See, this is what happens when ACSA staff starts texting you while you're in the middle of the show. Okay, folks, thank you for dealing with the technology issues that we have faced, not just this week, but last week as well. I will tell Edgar that it is all his fault and make sure that he knows that he has some responsibility to it. Thank you, folks, so much for joining us. We're going to end a little bit early today, ahead of the bottom of the hour. Grab a little lunch and enjoy the rest of the afternoon, the rest of the day, the rest of the week. We'll see you back here next week on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Thanks for joining us.